Good evening. Today is March 3rd, and we are meeting with the board for the policy committee. I'm Linda Stone, and we will be starting with the roll call to my left.
Rebecca Paya, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board. Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Ron Spring, Council Rock HR Director.
Andy Sanko, Superintendent.
Ann Horner, School Board.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Nicole Khan, School Board.
Matthew McCarthy, Tech Integration.
Tracy Oseki, School Board.
Okay, so before we begin, I just wanted to restate the purpose of the policy committee for those that are not staying up to date with us. The purpose is to regularly review all the district policies for legal compliance and to make sure that our policies mirror the district's practices. So we have been focusing first on policies related to the students, which end up being policy 200. And so with that, I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Spring.
Great, thank you. I just want to start off with our disclaimer that this is a reminder that for reliable, accurate, up-to-date information about our district, please refer to resources, websites, and social media platforms managed by the Council Rock School District. We urge the community to be judicious in choosing where to obtain information and to be aware that there are unauthorized social media accounts using the Council Rock name that post false and misleading information regarding district matters. If you question what you are seeing, need additional details, or reliable fact check, please contact the district directly. Our contact information is readily available on our website at www.crsd.org. And again, thank you all. For today's policy meeting, we have approximately thank you, Dr. Sanko. We have approximately 8 policies to review. These are not the first time we are reviewing the policies. The majority of these policies are up for second read if the board so deems at the next board meeting. So wanted to just go through them again. We do have some updates, particularly with respect to the electronic device policy to discuss as well, and we will be getting to that towards the end of our meeting. So again, first is the student policy 211, which is the student accident insurance policy. This is before you for approval to move to the board for second read. There were no substantive or any changes for that matter the February 20th board meeting to the present. So this is carrying forward from the February 20th board meeting and is again before the board for approval to move for a second read.
So does anyone have any comments on this?
Great. So then the next 2 policies. Oh, any questions?
Nope. Questions? Okay.
Great. Thank you. So the next 2 policies are current policies that have no changes to them. Policy 212, which is reporting student progress, as well as 215, which is the promotion and retention policies. Once again, these are policies that were previously passed in, both previously passed in June 2018. There have been no changes to these since those dates, nothing either through the law or for the district. And again, these are being requested to move forward for second read at the March board meeting.
Have any questions regarding these 2? Okay.
Great, thank you. The next policy, which is 217, is our graduation policy. As I stated at the board meeting and at a previous committee meeting, The two most prominent substantive changes deal with areas that have been fairly apparent in previous reviews of other policies, and it's updating with respect to providing supports for students experiencing educational instability, as well as students of children of active duty military families. Again, there's been updates in those laws, which is why we've seen both enrollment policies, with respect to graduation policies, and some other policies that we've been moving forward with. I know that Mr. Hickey has had a question, not so much with the policy, but tangential, that has been, that the board has been talking about with respect to, the board's setting graduation requirements and what those requirements should be or should not be. But with respect to the current changes, we're asking that this get moved for a second read based on the substantive changes, again, dealing with students experiencing educational instability, as well as those children of active duty military parents.
Yes, Mr. Roosevelt?
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Students experiencing educational instability, could you define provide some categories to what educational instability means? I mean, it kind of sounds kind of broad.
Absolutely. The two most common areas that you see that is in foster children who are in foster care through, the state, as well as homeless students who are homeless, who may be living in a homeless facility with their family, or who currently don't have a resident, and how we making sure that they are supported from an educational standpoint.
Right, so they could be moving around much the same way a family in a military could be
Yes.
moving around from different places.
Yes,
And the term is just to try to capture both without
Exactly.
articulating both of those terms?
absolutely. I believe it was more, in the past, it was more specifically just referred to as homeless students, but this expands the category to make sure it encompasses all those who are who are experiencing educational instability. And we'll see this again as well to Mr. Roosevelt, with students moving around when we get back to the immunization and communicable disease policy. Just how to ensure that we have the students in our school and can educate them in light of the fact that they may be moving and may not have consistency in their home life.
Ms. Tracy?
I have two questions. One is just formatting. Mr. Spring, I know we talked about the bold and non-bold,
Yes.
but it looks like there's still a lot of bold floating around
So
here.
that's in the current policy. In the modified policy with the red lines,
Oh, okay.
they should be.
Okay. Okay, and then just a question for Dr. Sanko, I guess. I had never, maybe I missed it the first time, obviously I did, but can you speak to where it talks about part-time students? Is that something that happened?
Board speaks to what?
Part-time students? Because I'd like to learn more about it.
Yeah, so part-time students, the homeschool law recently changed, and students who are homeschooled can attend our schools for 25% of the time. And that was a change just enacted within the last year. And so that's what it's referring to when it's talking about part-time students.
Oh, that's, okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. Moving ahead to policy 252, which is dating violence and addressing students who are victims of dating violence. This policy talks again about our behavioral threat assessment team, which is new within the district in the past several years, and as I believe Mr. Mihalik has spoken about with the board, and it's work he's really setting that up in a strong manner. It also deals with our aligns with our new policy that talks about the discipline of students convicted or adjudicated of sexual assault. And what it speaks about there is it really just refers or aligns itself with that policy, indicating that if their student is convicted or adjudicated of sexual assault against another student, that we do defer to that policy that was previously passed to ensure how we handle the placement of the student who is adjudicated of that crime. It also adds information in here, really just directing that the principal has the ability to issue code of conduct violations if they are appropriate, as well as refer any incidents to law enforcement. As Dr. Sanko has said in the past, we are mandated reporters, and that is an essential point of, any person involved in education that they need to report it. But this also just lays it out in the policy very clearly as well. And finally, it does talk about, in addition to there being concerns about dating violence, the conduct may also fall into the discrimination rate and again, it just really aligns us with what our policy currently is and allows for the administration to move ahead, if appropriate, with a discrimination investigation, either in conjunction with or parallel to a investigation with respect to the allegations of sexual assault.
Any questions regarding this? Yes.
This is our
Ms. Hunt?
second read, correct?
Yes.
And then so we'll be going for board approval in March?
If that's a
Okay.
determination, yes.
Thank you.
And just for the, sorry,
Mr. Tate?
and just for, mostly for the community's sake, whenever we bring a policy forward with those changes, they have been reviewed by the solicitor.
Correct. In addition to any questions we may have that are addressed with the solicitor, we do, when I share it with the board as well, I copy the solicitors for their review on all policies as well.
Thank you.
Well, so this policy is a new policy, and as I discussed last time, this deals with educational opportunities for military children. And it really relates under graduation, immunization, enrollment, all those provisions that we've spoken about with respect to how we ensure that students of active duty military parents are educated, are provided their education as quickly as possible, are enrolled as quickly as possible, are ensured that they're able to meet the graduation requirements as quickly as possible. As we all know, graduation requirements from state to state vary, and we don't want a child of an active duty military parent who may be transferred, whose parents may be transferred due to their military service to multiple states throughout their high school career, to have to fall back and potentially be held back or elongate their high school career. So it's really to ensure that we are providing those students with the necessary supports they can in light of their parents being active duty military. This is actually, while we did discuss that last policy committee, going forward for a first read, and that's because it wasn't on the agenda due to my oversight. It wasn't on the agenda at the last board meeting, but it will be on for a first read at this board meeting.
So again, this is policy 254, which is a new policy and first read.
Correct, yes. The next policy is one that we've had the opportunity to discuss multiple times, and it deals with immunization and communicable diseases. It went through a first read at the previous February board meeting. In this form, it deals with, again, the changes. There was the change in the first paragraph which based on our previous committee meeting, we revised to ensure that said from state health officials and local health officials to make sure that that was clear. It also has information, again, to Mr. Roosevelt's point, homeless students and foster care, students who are dealing with educational instability. It also deals with, really explains the fact that a student may be excluded from school if they do have a communicable disability. And we did talk about the statute that lays out, what are the state guidelines if someone has a particular illness. One that's come up a lot in policy is, 24-hour fever-free. But that's dealt with and addressed in this policy. Again, this was approved through first read on February 20th and would be up for a second read at the upcoming meeting. Oh, I did speak with, and this was shared at the last meeting, and via email, I did speak with Dr. Damsker, or email correspondence with Dr. Damsker per the board request, who did reply, as well as a follow-up response from our solicitor as well.
Yes, Ms. Horner?
We're talking about military too, so where does that fall in? Are they gonna follow just as a regular student without,
So-
put homeless and foster in here with our military?
Absolutely. So there is discussion about immunization for active military in the enrollment, I believe in the enrollment policy. And it talks about ensuring that students are enrolled pending receipt of the immunization records.
Yep.
And I do believe that was in the enrollment policy.
Ms. Khan?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, kind of going off what Ms. Horner was, I think, suggesting, but I'm not sure. But my question would be, I know you, in the red line items or the new additions, discussing specifically the homeless students and foster care students, and then Ms. Horner just asked about the military students, why it wasn't instead described as the students experiencing educational instability? Because then I know these are two of the main categories you described when Mr. Roosevelt asked for clarification. Why it wouldn't have that language in there, the students with experiencing educational instability, because that seemed to encompass everything,
So
or maybe not, so.
My understanding was, because in this case, homeless students aren't necessarily treated the same as foster students, so they wouldn't fall under one umbrella. Again, with respect to homeless students, it talks about in accordance with the provisions of the applicable law. If I recall correctly, that's also addressed under the enrollment policies. Foster care, I believe, is treated a little differently, as seen in the policy as opposed to homeless students. And in that case, I believe there's a 30-day window to provide immunization and medical certifications or to complete multiple doses, where I believe, if I recall correctly, with respect to homeless students, it is a more elongated process because because I believe when it was discussed in the enrollment policy, it's very difficult many times as homeless families or homeless students move from place to place to be able to retain those records. So the process is a little different than with respect to a student or a child who would be in the foster care system.
Okay, I understand that, again, and I think it makes sense, thank you for clarifying that. But again, does it make sense to kind of thread all the policies together and having referencing, does it still make sense to include the students experiencing educational instability along with the separate categories of description for the homeless students and foster care students? So that's kind of how I'm seeing it in terms of addressing immunization and communicable diseases, so it addresses all of the scenarios. Does that make sense? I think I'm trying that, yeah.
Just saying, is it in the red?
Yes.
What's listed in red? You talk about homeless students, you talk about
Foster
foster care
students.
students. Should there be another
For educate, yeah.
paragraph that's just talks about the students of military families.
Or students experiencing
Or
educational instability, which
Both of them.
encompasses all, you know, that.
Yeah, my comment was similar. I find it confusing where in policy 217, it's sort of grabbed in this educational instability, but then in policy 203, it's broken out. Your explanation explains why it's broken out, because they're treated differently. So my preference actually would be to have each of them have their own paragraph since they're treated differently. Or, because, I agree
So,
with this.
right.
I don't know what, somebody may not understand what one of these terms means or why it's included and why it's excluded, why it's broken out, why it's encompassed. And I don't know, I think it's perhaps a bit picky, but it's formatting as well, so.
So if I understand correctly, homeless students and foster care students are the groups that fall under educational instability. So we could create a header for that and have those two under there. The reason we would break,
Just do,
we would
do
break
the same
them
for both.
I'm sorry.
Just do the same for both. I would think that you, whatever, if you're gonna have a header and break it out, even have that and then break it out into these different categories, it's fine, but I just think they should be the same in whatever you do in 217 should be done in 203, obviously with different languages.
So-
Mr. Roosevelt, what paragraph are you looking at on 217?
I'm talking about the red parts that we're talking about in both policy 203 and the red parts that we've previously discussed about in 217, of which I had a question about.
So just so I understand, so 217, if I break them out, those paragraphs would be exactly the same though, the two paragraphs, because in that case, homeless students and foster students are treated the same in 217. So you would want, just so I understand it for myself, under students experiencing educational instability, have something for homeless students as well, and then a similar paragraph for foster students.
Sure, I don't want to make a title a sentence, but I just think they should be treated the same so that we can understand educational instability could be as a result of homelessness, it could be a result of foster care, it could be as a result of a military family, right? Or is
Well,
there any other
military
instance?
families are treated differently than
I
the
understand,
other.
yeah, no, I understand that
Yes.
they're all treated differently, but is there any other reason a student might face educational instability?
So I couldn't pinpoint it, but I will tell you, in our enrollment policy, it's defined as homelessness, foster care, or other forms of educational instability. So it's really a catch-all
Right,
to that. I couldn't enumerate exactly what those other forms may be, but I'm sure potentially there could be other forms of educational instability. And then children of active military wouldn't fall under educational instability. They would, because they're governed by a completely different statute
okay.
and different law.
So what would work, Mr. Spring, in terms of, you're saying,
Well,
should you say families that have children that are in educational instability as a header over
I think
homeless and foster?
I do think putting a header over there would make sense to Ms. Khan's point. I do think, to me, for Mr. Roosevelt's point, maybe defining where on 217 at the header where it says students experiencing educational disability, maybe defining it as homeless students, foster students, or other possible educational instability.
Right.
If that meets both.
Yeah.
That works.
Does anyone have an argument with that, or? So would we put that in now as a second, still be a second read? Because we'll really just format, we're not changing content.
And Dr. Sanko just provided me with some information too. Educational instability can also include court-ordered services under voluntary placement, custody agreement, an adjudication of dependency, delinquency, as well as starting a new school, re-engaging in school after an extended absence, student who may be out for a prolonged period of time, coming back, maybe out again. So those kind of fall under the umbrella of educational instability. But I think to Mr. Roosevelt's point, defining that in 217 and utilizing that header in 213, and 203, I think, makes sense and would help clarify it.
Okay. Ms. Oseki, did you have a question? All right, Mr. Hickey?
Just an odd one, I'm not sure what the answer would even be. As I look at this, just it says, with homeless students, there's no, I don't want to say guidelines. If you look under foster care and the students transferring, they have 30 days to provide proof of immunization, blah, 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 or to satisfy the requirements of an exemption. But if you're homeless, you don't have to do anything, meaning the district has to take homeless kids without any immunizations, or possibly, but if you're a foster care, you have to provide immunization records.
And again, I think my reading of it was that because a student is homeless versus when a student may be in foster care, the availability of those records may not readily be there to provide proof. I do believe that within the law, if I recall correctly, there is a provision in there saying that the school would work with that student to help, somehow to work with the student, work with the state, to be able to provide whatever records are available, and then take the steps from there.
Okay.
Are we good? Mr. Roosevelt?
Yeah, Mr. Hickey brings up a good point. And this is another example, I believe, of where we've talked about policies that relate to each other that might need to dovetail. I don't know if this is the case, but it reminds me, haven't we already looked at enrollment? Didn't we already pass the enrollment one recently? Didn't this have similar sort of
Yes,
breakdowns?
yes.
So how does enrollment deal, just to remind us, how does enrollment policy deal with this category of individuals?
So with respect to students experiencing educational instability, the way enrollment looks at it is that a student needs to be enrolled, and I'm reading from policy, even if the student or parent or guardian is unable to produce the required documents.
Right.
And then in accordance with the law, regulation, and board policy. So again, it really focuses on getting that student enrolled as quickly as possible and then worrying about the paperwork after.
Right, but in some cases, we've defining the timeline for the paperwork. In other cases, the policy does not.
Correct, and I think that's based on law. The timelines are based on the statutes.
Okay, could we reference those, or have we not already?
So I think they are, if you look
I
at.
see 5, 8, and 9, but,
Yeah,
I have a state law.
yeah.
Yeah, they're referenced. And then for the most part, circumstances surrounding homelessness are usually case by case because every case is a little different. So leaving it just where we're following the statute is enough to define it any further. Would not be advantageous. Because we don't know every case.
and the policies are the enrollment policy as well as 251 happens to be our policy that deals specifically with, which is from April of 2024, students experience homelessness, foster care, and other educational instability. And that, I believe, was presented last year by Mr. Devlin. So it directs the board to those two policies as well as state law.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of the situation is the district, as a public school, is required to educate the children of the community regardless of their situation. And these policies effectively say that, but are dealing with individuals in different cases and dealing with the law as it treats them as a class.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
And it's dealing with state law.
Correct.
That treats them as a class,
Correct,
which may be different from another class.
correct.
All right, so are we okay with everything now as we've gone through? And we can move to, are we moving on?
And I'll make the changes to 217 as well as 203 that we discussed, and I will share that with the board this week.
Great, and there'll still be second read. Great. Excellent.
So the final policy is our electronic device policy. And there were some additions that I made to it, and they are in red after our previous meeting. The first addition was one that I believe was raised by Mr. Roosevelt, and which talked about, making sure that we do acknowledge the role the electronic device may have at impacting student socialization, memory retention, and problem-solving skills. So we wanted to make sure that that was discussed straight at the beginning, and that impact was, noted in there as well as part of, our overall vision and philosophy with respect to our electronic devices. The other one was, we talked about who establishes the rules, and we wanted to make sure that there wasn't really a conflict in that paragraph, where in the first part of the paragraph we're talking about principals in cooperation with the superintendent, and then towards the bottom we just talk about the principals establish the rules. So one of the things that was important, and what we do in practice now as well, is ensuring that the superintendent, as well as our other instructional leadership, our directors of elementary and secondary education, play a role in that, as well as the principals. And the one follow-up update as well, and I will allow permit Dr. Sanko at this point, if you'd like to touch bases. We had the opportunity for the board to meet with students at both high schools to get a feel from them as to their perspectives with respect to the policy. It was very open. It was really, we want to hear from you. We don't even want to really tell you where to go with it. How do you see the policy that you feel would best fit you? We relied on the administration to provide us with a subset of students. They made sure that we had someone from all grades, representatives as well. And I think Dr. Sanko said it best when he said, we should have just had the students present, because they get it so much better than we all do, and better than the adults. And they raised a lot of points that we hadn't even really thought about. Well, I hadn't really thought about. I'll speak for myself. I guess so, going from like the macro to the micro, it was actually unanimous at both schools, because at the very end, we polled them, and they all feel that the policy as implemented now really fits their needs. But they gave us real life examples and really important points on why it does. And some of the stuff that, was new for me hearing from the instructional standpoint is pretty much across the board, they all talked about science class, how they utilize their phones for lab submissions. And one of the biggest things are when they're required to take pictures through their microscopes, the only way they have the ability to do that is through their phone. And so they talked about, utilizing their phones in science class. They talked about utilizing their phones in, with respect to history class, social studies when it comes to making projects. A lot of times there's videos involved in the projects, as well as in English class. Many times they're making videos as well. For TV production, they do a lot of editing on their phones. With respect to marketing, when they have to market things, utilization of QR codes and things of that nature. They talked about how it was used within their classes, and one of the things that they emphasized was how at the high school level, and I'm going to use my own term, was really the importance of learning how to be good digital citizens. And their view was, we're going to after high school, we're going to college, maybe go into the workforce. There's no one in these areas saying, put your phones away. So we need to learn that responsibility. And it's not going to be good if we go from, one extreme to the other. But what they said was they saw a progression from freshman to senior year, where many of them were saying that in their freshman year, the teachers tended to be more strict with respect to their cell phone policies. And as they matriculated, I guess, for lack of a better term, throughout their high school career, freshman to senior, there was more of a relaxation from year to year. And it really put the focus on, the words they used were responsibility and accountability. It really was used to help them learn their responsibility and the accountability of being good digital citizens and helping them prepare for being able to go out into the real world. They talked about lunch, using it at lunch, and one of the things that they did say was they do use their phones at lunch, but they also use it as a means of socialization. So one example would be, they're sitting with their friends and they have their phones out and it's, hey, I saw this is pretty funny, take a look at this, and then that leads into a conversation. They do say that they do socialize with their friends, but they did also raise the importance of it. Clinic came up a lot, being able to communicate with their parents with respect to clinics, staying after for clinic and staying after for clubs and so on and so forth, particularly in lunch, being able to have that communication. Also, many of them working after school, having that ability as well. And Dr. Sanko, I'm sure I'm...
No, I think you described it well. I agree with what Ronnie said. I said to the board, we met with 8 students from each high school and their principal. And both schools talked about how they were permitted to have more flexibility and more latitude as they went through the grade levels. Council Rock North, I learned the term phone jail. It's called phone jail at North. Most of the teachers have the sleeve, like the old calculator sleeve or the sleeve that you put your shoes on in the back of the closet door. Many teachers use that. The students talked about that became less of a practice as they went through the courses. And some even talked about, the higher level courses, they were using their phones more. Ronnie talked about taking pictures through the microscope and being able to upload their labs to Canvas or upload their calculus or math projects to Canvas. They were able to do that with much more ease than they could with the Chromebooks. But I think that, and the students were great. They even talked about in front of the principals, they said, there are 1 or 2 classes I've been in over my 2, 3, 4 years where the teachers sometimes are a little bit too lenient at the front end and they need to tighten it up. Because once those rules aren't established, then it's harder to pull people back to follow the rules. They talked about how the teachers are understanding that if there is something that is emergent, they can get up and get to their phone, though it doesn't happen that frequently. And they felt that their phone was an important tool for them to have as part of the process going through the high schools.
So, Mr. Spring, sounds like you did you had a lot of conversations, teachers, students, principals, to come up with this, which leaves flexibility at the school level and the principal. Is there any particular comments that any individuals have here about what they'd like to see? Because we're not at first read yet on this. We're still working on open dialogue Okay. Ms. Horner?
Just want to understand what this means on, I think it's the fourth paragraph down, building principals, and then if you go halfway in, it says building principals shall, and then there's a cross between words, establish rules and.
The cross out, it was there, and I'm taking that out,
You're
where it says
taking it out?
establish rule, correct. So it previously said building principals shall establish rules and notify students.
Yep,
Establish rules is crossed out because we talk in the first sentence about the rules being established in consultation with the principal, secondary, and
notify
elementary.
students.
Correct.
Ms. Osecki?
Thank you.
I'm curious in your conversations with the students if cyberbullying and that sort of thing came up, or if it was strictly discussing their use at school.
That did not come
It
up.
did not.
Do you find that we've been getting any those kinds of calls through anonymous calls, safe to say, sort of thing?
Can't say.
I don't, I'm not privy to, I don't receive the safe to says that relate to students, so I wouldn't be able to.
I see every safe to say that comes through, and so, we do get things that come through anonymously. I would be comfortable and confident in saying there's not a day that goes by that we, at the building level, at least at one of our buildings, we're not dealing with something with regard to social media. Whether it happens inside the school or not, it finds its way into the school. We're dealing with one right now at one of the schools that, we have the police involved in, and they were able to secure an IP address. And that's not the easiest of tasks. We can't do it, but it's not the easiest of tasks for the police. But it doesn't mean that things are coming through being titled cyberbullying. It could be something else that leads us down the road of something that happened outside of school by way of a social media post, a chat, Snapchat, and Instagram. But we see that every day.
Well, with 10,000 students, I would imagine you're going to have some comments. I'm not sure who was next. Mr. Tate?
All right, quick question. Is cyberbullying more prevalent in the lower grades in the high school, or is it across the board?
I think that would be a difficult question to answer for you. I think that there's a lot of area around that in terms of, how do we define it? How do we define when somebody makes an anonymous call to safe to say? How does a parent define it when they call the school or email the school? So I don't know that I can put a percentage or a weight on elementary or secondary, but I can tell you that with certainty that there are things that happen outside of the school that really are outside our jurisdiction that spill into the school every day. We do see on occasion students that make a decision to do something by way of social media inside the school that they shouldn't be doing, but that's less frequent than the first example.
Outside of school. Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else with Mr. Roosevelt?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is we're recognizing that it's difficult to put the toothpaste back in the tube with this. But my question really pertains to parity based upon what you were saying, Mr. Spring. And it brings me two questions. Do all students have devices with equal capability, or have devices, and if they do, with equal capability? I'm specifically thinking about the QR codes. I'm specifically thinking about taking pictures with the microscope and all that you've mentioned. So that's my first question.
And I'll answer that. The answer is no. We talk to the students about that. Not every student in our high schools anyway, based on what we learn from the students, they do not all have cell phones.
So the next question, does our curriculum require the use of taking pictures of slides and microscopes, which is easily done with a cell phone?
I don't know if it requires it. I'm sure there are, it accounts for students who may not have that ability to do that. But I don't believe it requires the use of those electronic devices, but I think having them help facilitate.
But our one-to-one Chromebooks have the capability to do most or all of the things that the students talk to us about, not with the efficiency and the speediness of what they're able to do with their cell phone.
And that brings back my concern with the first, with respect to parity. If all students, some students have an advantage electronically, but others don't, is there parity? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that or what to do with it. It's just a thought.
Good point. Yeah, what do you do with that kid? Say somebody doesn't have a cell phone, or the not latest model of cell phone. So he's punished educationally for not having access to it?
Well, again, I would say that they have the capability through the cell phone, or through the Chromebook. Now, again, it's not as good of a vehicle perhaps based on what the students shared with us in terms of efficiency.
But one would hope that the teacher could take that into account. I mean, one would hope that the students aren't being punished, graded harshly.
I mean, you can always use the teacher's cell phone to take the photos and then have them forwarded into the student's Chromebook. Or sometimes a lot of these projects that the kids work on, it's in teams as well. So a lot of that gets managed in that way as a team.
I think that opens up a serious privacy concern if teachers are now required or willing to give their phones to students for an unknown amount of time. I don't know if that's really a good idea. Further, I don't know if it's a good idea to then have the teacher then have to make a one-on-one communication attempt with a student. Just from my experience in the Scouts, we always try to make sure there's two adults on something like that. It just, it creates problems.
Actually, I think it's prohibited.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And just to address something that came up as well, I know we're focusing on cell phones, but the policy is a little broader than that. And the only reason I bring that up is because one of the areas that some of the students brought up was that, and they said, well, would this relate to my iPad? Or would this relate to my personal device? And what they found was a lot of the students, well, it was brought to us by some students, obviously we didn't meet with the majority, but that many students utilize their iPads for taking notes or their own personal device for taking notes rather than the school provided computer, just for their ease, just for their comfort. Now again, not everyone has an iPad, not everyone has their own personal device, but that is an area, I know we're focusing, and majority of the conversation revolves, and rightfully so, around cell phones. But there is the utilization of other electronic devices that the students brought to mind and Dr. Sanko's attention, which, in all honesty, I didn't even think of going into the meeting.
Well, yeah,
They
I mean,
discussed.
that's the whole reason of defining it this
Exactly.
way is because the old policy was very particular
Correct.
and outdated technology. We don't want to do the same thing,
Correct,
so.
yep.
Yeah.
Mrs. Pally?
So I'm curious, with the students that do not have devices, is it age-related primarily? Because maybe some parents don't want their kids to have cell phones when they're freshmen, but they're okay when they're like juniors or seniors. Because some families are more strict about phone usage. Do you know?
Totally unrelated, I can tell you I had a conversation today, unrelated, and in that conversation, I learned that a student in 11th or 12th grade, upper high school, family prohibits electronic devices, the family prohibits gaming systems, the family prohibits social media. And I think that's up to the family if that's, what they want to do. I mean, the student still has our our Chromebook, the district Chromebook, but I think that's different in every family. There was a time when I was in elementary school, and if I recall correctly, many of the families were holding off giving a cell phone to their children until either they were in sixth grade or until they went to middle school. So, yeah.
Mr. Tate?
If a teacher feels a need to acquire a phone jail or similar device to help manage cell phone use, will the district pay for it?
I asked that when the teachers were here, and the answer was no.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that could be changed, but I specifically asked them, and they said they have to
I
pay
think
for it.
if that is a need, I think we could certainly do that. What I heard loud and clear, particularly from the students and from some of the teachers with whom I spoke, there are different gradations. Like there's a company out there now that'll sell you a bag that you lock your phone in and you pull the key out. Well, instructionally, I think you're losing 10 minutes on the front end. Get your phone up.
And on the back end too.
On the back end too, but the sleeves, as Council Rock affectionately calls phone jails, that hang off the whiteboard or hang on the back of the door, many of our teachers already have them, and I don't see that being an issue if that's the direction, we want it to go.
Others mention that they just have their students
Uh,
put their phone
oh,
on
Mr.
the blackboard.
Correct, I was just gonna mention.
On what?
The students
On the
brought
black-
that
Item
up
up on
too.
black, whiteboard. black.
On the tray,
Yeah.
I call it chalk tray, but
Yeah.
It's still there, huh?
word tray.
Wow.
So, oh,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Ms. Osei.
Just because it's related to that, if the phones are on the chalk tray and somebody goes up to go to the bathroom and bonks one and it falls and breaks, is that on us? I think we should provide phone jails. I mean, to me, that seems like it's not very expensive and it can support the teachers and not get us in that situation where somebody knocks one off a chalk tray and it breaks.
Well, they could knock one out of the phone jail when they're pulling hairs out and not
Sure,
say.
that seems
see what's
harder.
happening. So,
I mean,
but I don't think that is, I can't sit here and tell you what those sleeves cost, but if that's something that we wanted to do, I'm sure we would be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm just not in favor of spending district money for these new fandangled
Oh,
companies that come up with all these fancy different ways to
To
lock your
lock things
phone
up.
up. It just seems,
Keep it
it's a
simple.
wonderful opportunity for marketers to get involved with, but I don't think that
They're
that's,
marketing it hard too, and I think about the instructional minutes.
yeah,
You have 25, 30 students in a high school
You don't want to put that
class.
on the teacher.
right.
Yeah.
well,
A shoe sleeve,
Can we look at, find out at the high school level, how many of those phone jails would be needed and what the cost is, and we could bring it back up in finance?
Are we all adopting the term phone jail?
Why not?
at the top, please
Why
get it
not?
engraved,
Yeah, we
CR phone
we're gonna
jail.
call them phone jail.
Yeah, let me work with Al and Tony, and we'll get some ideas on products and price.
Sure.
Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I was thinking only if a teacher requested it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't,
We're not
I'm
just,
not
not to just,
suggesting school-wide.
yeah, not to just buy it, but
Yeah,
if there's
no.
anyone. Mr. Hickey?
Yeah, so I'd like just, the issue is only at the high school.
Right,
Because at the middle school, there is a policy, it's consistent across the district of what they can and can't. Well, I
right.
shouldn't say can do, they can.
They
In
can.
both schools, they're not allowed to have them, no offense or but, well, I shouldn't say no offense or buts, but there's a policy and it's consistent.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to have, just as long as we have something that is fair and consistent. I mean, like Mike, it's hard, it's out of the tube, but by the same token, these kids are gonna figure out every excuse in the world why they need their phone, in the classroom or in their lunchroom or whatever the case may be. But, if we can find something that's consistent, that it works,
By the way, do they use, like, they have Apple phone,
Yes.
on their wrist? Does that go in the phone jail too?
No.
No?
But I will say, the high school students with whom we spoke did say that there are violations. Kids do lose their phones and they get taken away. They were quick to point that out, that if students aren't appropriately using it. And we also brought up that we heard a lot about socialization at the middle level with the off and away during the day. And that's when Ronnie just shared a little bit about the students start talking to us about it encourages socialization when one finds something on the phone and then they go back and forth on it.
I wouldn't call it social.
Well, that's how they
Conversation,
us,
maybe.
no, let me work with Tony and Al. We'll get some product information and some price information.
Great. Mr. Roosevelt?
Yeah, I just want to also encourage that we're reviewing or impressing upon our curriculum coordinators and our teachers that we're not creating lessons that require this, and give a student that has an up-to-date phone advantages that a student with a strict family doesn't even have a phone, let alone the area between them with the rest of the students in the class. I think it just creates problems. That's the other way to attack this issue, is just from a curriculum standpoint and a homework requirement. I mean, maybe this is part of the homework that they could do at home, right? But there's a student that has this device that can do it there in class, and then they don't need to do it at home and they're done. I don't know. There's a lot of different varieties, but we should be careful that we're not instituting a situation of where parity is an issue.
So that may be something that you can work up a statement or two inside this policy? Or would you leave that outside the policy? What do you think, Mr. Spring?
My gut would be to leave it outside the policy and have it addressed by the curriculum coordinator through an educational focus. But that's just my own personal.
And then make the principals aware that that's, okay. Ms. Oseki?
I just had a question about when students, my question is, are parents informed at the beginning of the year that students who disobey the cell phone policies will have their phones confiscated? Like, are parents informed, that their kid's $800 phone or whatever, could wind up in the principal's office or, for the whole day or for overnight? I don't know what the consequences are, but what's the communication like with parents? Because it's an expensive device, and I can imagine unhappy parents.
So the short answer is yes, but I can't give you details on how that's communicated at each building or at each level. But you're absolutely right that, as you would expect, our teachers are cognizant and concerned about taking somebody's phone, particularly for not just the cost, but we don't have a right to go through a cell phone and look at a cell phone. So, if and when we have a rule in place, it's best for everyone if everyone follows the rules. So we do. I don't know how it looks in every classroom or across every building, but what I've been part of in the past is the first offense, you lose it for the day. The second offense, the parent comes and picks it up, so that the student gets the message. But
And just to follow what Dr. Sanko said, for instance, I know at the elementary school, they provide the cell phone policy in the handbook. In addition, I believe the principal sent out to all parents a welcome back PowerPoint to all parents and students. And specifically in there, they do set forth consequences, first offense and further offenses for violation of the cell phone policy.
Was that for high school?
This is, the one that I just brought up was middle school.
Middle school.
I would have to look at. High school, I would think maybe it's in their code of conduct, but I don't have that in front of me. We can find out.
It might be an interesting exercise to because I feel like this comes up a lot, like, oh, well, this is the policy, how is it communicated to the families? Like, it might be interesting, that we could take a look at what the parents get at back to school night, or, that sort of thing
That's
on a
generally-
regular basis.
I'm sorry to mean to cut you off.
No.
That's generally where it happens. Like
Yeah.
back to school night at elementary, it typically happens on the back to school night at all of the buildings. I was at many of the back to school nights for many years, but I recall just at the 2 middle schools this year, I don't remember exactly what they said. They addressed parents in that setting too.
Yeah, I mean, even, my gut was like, oh, maybe we should take a look at it, but probably it's just something that like, maybe the administration meets with the building principals and says like, hey, here are the things in the policy that you need to make sure are covered, We don't necessarily have to be involved, maybe you already do it.
What we can do, we have principals at every building review with students every year some of our major policies. The drug and alcohol 227, the weapons policy, cyberbullying policy, and that is something that we require our principals to do at every level. We could add, once we get to a landing spot on this, we could include this with that beginning of year review for all the students.
That sounds like a good idea.
Ms. Horner?
During the cyberbullying seminar that was held this year, is that also a place that they talk about the cell phone policies that go in?
They did. We had, as you know, we had the district attorney's office, and detectives from the district attorney's office in, and we had an assistant DA, I believe, join a couple of those times. They did talk about cell phones. Yes, absolutely.
So my question is, does anyone believe that we need to make any modifications to this, or can we then move forward and present this at the next policy meeting as a first read?
And actually, when I did the policy report last month at the board meeting, I indicated to families that like they should come here now because next month it will be on for first read.
Okay, so as it is written.
Just clarifying, so this will be on the March board meeting for first read. Is that correct?
On the,
Correct.
Okay.
the March board meeting?
Yeah, that's first read.
First read.
Okay,
And then in the interim, so I understand my March orders, I'll get with Tony and Al, I'll get product and price on what we're calling the phone jail. And then also, when we get to a landing spot, we'll include this electronic device policy in the beginning of year policies that we present to all the students.
Excellent, excellent.
And have a conversation with Al and Nicole with respect to addressing the curricular aspect that Mr. Roosevelt brought up.
so this policy will be reformatted.
Correct.
Okay,
So that covers the policies that we'll bring before the board, if there's any other further discussion.
And before Ronnie goes on, I know I didn't do this and I should have because I thought it. I just want to thank all the students that joined us. That was, I wrote them a note and told them all it was the best part of my day. They were really plugged in and really gave insightful information.
No pun intended.
no pun intended,
Exactly.
yes,
No, it's-
great.
They were amazing.
Yeah.
Those schools, just amazing.
Yeah.
Go.
Good.
So is there anything else that anyone wants to discuss this evening?
I'll let it go. I'll let it go.
Then I think the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. That's efficient.